This video is going to be a critical review of Monster Hunter Wilds. In it, I'll be talking about my problems with the difficulty, the story, the entire structure of the game, and my concerns over the direction of this series. Not everything in this video will be negative, but it will be negative overall, as even the things I like are impacted by the things I don't. I realize that this can be an abrasive topic, especially if you like Monster Hunter Wilds, so I will remind you that you can exit out of this video at any time. But if you choose to stick around and hear me out, I'm sure you'll realize that I love Monster Hunter, and you'll agree with at least some of the reasons why I found it so disappointing. Before we start though, I think it's important to give some context. There is a kind of old-gen versus new-gen attitude in the Monster Hunter community, and I want to make it clear that this video is not one of those. My first and favorite Monster Hunter is Monster Hunter World. I've played 4U and 3U, and I think there's a lot to enjoy about those games, but I would not want to go back to those systems, and I don't believe that they're better than what was introduced in Monster Hunter World. This is not an old-gen versus new-gen argument, it's a new fan versus newer fan argument. And it parallels the argument we've already had between the Monster Hunter World fans and the Monster Hunter Rise fans. Monster Hunter Rise minimized or removed many of the elements I felt were important to Monster Hunter World. Monster Hunter Rise is flashier, faster, easier. Tracking was removed, meaning you'd know where the monster is at all times. Counters or counter equivalents were given to most weapons, homogenizing the gameplay and making them feel samey. The moveset, the mobility, the damage, and the counters available to the hunter were so strong that player power had never been higher, and the monsters simply couldn't keep up. And that's the real source of the easiness in Monster Hunter Rise. It's not that the monsters move slowly, it's just that the hunter has more than enough ways to deal with whatever attacks, movement, or damage you give them. The importance of both nutrients and food were greatly minimized, because eating in Monster Hunter Rise would give you your full health bar. In Rise, when you're knocked down, you could use Wirefall to quickly get back into the action, or get to safety and heal at a pretty minor cost, basically eliminating or greatly reducing the situation in which you would be on the ground and you have to carefully get up so as to not get hit again right away. The importance of sharpening was also reduced because of the Palamute. No longer do you have to wait for the monster to run away or to find an opportunity in combat. With the Palamute, you can just sharpen while on the move. And I think the philosophy behind all these changes is clear. It's all things that facilitate getting back into the fight with the monster, and anything that interfered with that needed to be pared away. I really dislike this aspect of Monster Hunter Rise, but it had the excuse of being a portable title. They're often experimental and flashy. My hope was that Monster Hunter Wilds would not go in the same direction, that the ubiquity of counters would be removed, preparation made more important, for Wirefall to be removed, for sharpening to go back to being more difficult, and for difficulty even in the low rank to exist in some way, for fights to be engaging, and for the difficulty to not exclusively be centered around endgame content or title updates. Some amount of difficulty spikes or walls distributed across the main story. As it turns out, Monster Hunter Wilds had none of that. Its art style and monster designs are closer to Monster Hunter World, and I appreciate that, but in terms of gameplay, it's continued to move in the Monster Hunter Rise direction. When I got into this series, it instantly became one of my favorites. Monster Hunter is as important to me as something like From Software games or Zelda, the kind of thing that I thought I'd be interested in for the rest of my life. But if the next Monster Hunter game releases, and I find that it's continued to go in this direction, then I probably won't follow. Before Monster Hunter Wilds released, Polygon released an article titled "Monster Hunter Wilds is so streamlined it may have lost its soul." It's actually an excellent article, and details many of the same problems I have with Monster Hunter Wilds. Of particular note is their comments on the difficulty. They describe it as agonizingly easy to veteran players. Quote, "I want to say Wilds is perhaps the easiest entry in the series yet, largely due to the new wound system, which allows you to perform special attacks on monsters that deal devastating amounts of damage, often netting you monster parts or in some cases knocking them over. The dual blades had me tearing through even the most formidable monsters, lacerating their legs, puncturing their hides, and creating wound after wound to continue a cycle of just dealing a disgusting amount of damage over and over and over again. In a way that almost felt mind-numbing. I zoned out during fights. My evade window was so large I could often get a boost from perfect dodging attacks, which meant when I would dodge I would also spin around in a flurry of blades, dealing even more damage. Frustrated, I switched to Hunting Horn to try and give myself a challenge, but the experience was mostly the same." End quote. IGN's review video said many of the same things, and a great deal of that video was dedicated to criticizing how easy the game felt.
Every weapon also has a simple-to-execute focus strike that will deal a burst of damage to a wound and break it right away. So maximizing the amount of time you leave one open and then using that finisher before it closes naturally is an interesting subgame to manage. Or at least it would be if Wilds ever presented me with a challenge that pushed me to make those considerations. Whether I was playing online or solo, I've never had a mission reach the 20-minute mark, and I've only fainted 2 times total across dozens of hours. Compare that to World, which had real tests like Kieran, who smacked me silly my first couple of attempts, forcing me to regroup and craft an armor set around thunder resistance, and it's hard not to feel like Capcom's desire to make this a more inviting Monster Hunter sanded off some of the bumps I actually enjoyed in terms of overcoming big threats.
Do you know how odd it feels to have IGN and Polygon complain that the latest Monster Hunter game is too easy? And they are not isolated incidents. I watched many of the pre-release reviews, many of them from well-liked, established Monster Hunter YouTubers, and 100% of the reviews I watched felt that Wilds was too easy, maybe the easiest game in the series. Now admittedly, they did still give it a good review, but the point is that almost universally, reviewers listed it as a criticism. They agree with me. The only difference is that I perhaps think it's a bigger deal than they do. And I'll soon explain why. But first we're going to have to deal with some platitudes. The topic of difficulty is often emotionally charged. Without fail, it seems to elicit the same series of replies in the comments. It's difficult for people to listen when they have these pre-packaged, ready-made replies, and having heard them so often, I'm going to try and preempt the situation and respond to the arguments I'm sure to hear now. Number 1. The games aren't getting easier, you're getting better. Or another similar phrase, the hardest Monster Hunter is the first one you play. What these phrases are trying to say is that having played a Monster Hunter game, you will have acquired some skills that transfer to playing another Monster Hunter game. These skills include but are not limited to understanding how certain weapons work, understanding crafting, maybe understanding the general tempo of monster attacks. The point being made is that Monster Hunter has some transferable skills that will make your excursions into other Monster Hunter games easier than they would have otherwise been. And they're right. The sentiment behind those phrases is true, but the phrases themselves are not. You are getting somewhat better as you play more of these games, but the games are also getting easier. Both of those things can be true at once. Now, I might be wrong, but I think the first time I heard the phrase, the games aren't getting easier, you're getting better, was from a Gaijin Hunter video. And I believe he's done a lot to popularize that saying. So I think it says a lot that in his Monster Hunter Wilds video review, he said the following. Monster Hunter as a game is progressively easier the more experience you have in the series, but it's also true to say that Monster Hunter Wilds is probably the easiest entry in the series. End quote. In a later video, Gaijin Hunter does some testing that seems to confirm that fact. This is what he said.
Anyways, eating a Rathian Fireball, I just put on a basic high-rank leather set, 160 defense. So this will be a little bit bigger damage numbers than you'll get with your more beefed-up high-rank set, but I wanted to make sure that I could see the difference. Looking at just a normal 5-star threat pretty much is where the Tempered starts at its 3-star rating. And it just goes up from there. So if you compare a normal 3-star rated one to a Tempered 5-star, it's 225% more damage. What you're seeing here is a breath attack, and those are the different damages that I took. For comparison, I did go back to Monster Hunter Rise and I recreated the same set with the same elemental weaknesses and the defense of 160 or whatever it was, and I ate a high rank Rathian Fireball to the face a few times. And it measured out to roughly about 67.5 damage, which would put it right in between about the 4 and 5 star for the normal Rathian, which is interesting. So it definitely, when we think that the monsters aren't hitting as hard as they did in even something like Rise, I think there is some merit to that claim because that's what I'm seeing.
Now the 3-star is the baseline for monsters. It's the default, and it's what we have to fight in basically all of the low rank and high rank story. And that means that it's not at all a surprise that people are finding Monster Hunter Wilds to be significantly easier than previous titles. If Gaijin Hunter's numbers are to be believed, and I do believe them, then a Rathian in Monster Hunter Rise, a Monster Hunter often criticized for being too easy, does 36% more damage than the normal Rathian in Monster Hunter Wilds. Which means that you are not just getting better, the games are in fact getting easier. Now, there's a related phrase, but it differs enough that I'm going to address it independently. And that phrase is, low rank has always been easy, or the games have always been easy until the title updates, or Monster Hunter World was also easy. And what I would say to that is that Monster Hunter World is not easy in the same way that Monster Hunter Wilds is easy. It's a matter of degrees. If, for example, I would say Monster Hunter World was this difficult, then Monster Hunter Wilds I would put down here. You can't just say Monster Hunter World was easy too as a catch-all term when we're not taking into account the degree. You may have had the subjective experience of finding Monster Hunter World easy, but if we look at the qualities of the two games objectively, we should expect most people will find World much, much harder. And I can demonstrate that just by looking at the damage that the first few monsters do in both games. In World, the first 6 monsters you fight are Great Jagras, Kuluyaku, Puke Puke, Baroth, Juratotis, and Tobikadachi. And what's interesting is that World seems to want you to upgrade your armor. Because by the time you get to Tobikadachi, if you haven't upgraded your armor, many of his attacks will get close to one-shotting you. And that's because Wilds is set up to be easier. In World, you do not have easy access to your maximum health that you would get from eating. Because in order to get health from eating, the ingredient needs to be fresh. What ingredients are fresh is random, and you don't have access to all the ingredients to begin with. Those are earned through optional quests and the like. And you can only use 2 ingredients in the beginning, so the maximum health upgrade you can get is 20. And that 20 is not guaranteed. It could be 10, it could be nothing. Which means that the Monster Hunter Wilds hunter will start off every quest at full health, giving him 30 to 50 health more than the World Hunter would have at similar early quests. And you can't easily raise your health through nutrients or a max potion, because before you kill Tobikadachi, you do not have access to your farm, meaning you would have to gather the ingredients for your nutrients manually. And in fact, that's also another way in which Monster Hunter Wilds is easier. I always had mega potions in Wilds. I think they must have come from quests. They may have gotten there as quest rewards along with honey and other materials to make more mega potions. Whatever the reason, I never had to gather for mega potions, I just seemed to have an unlimited supply. And here's another thing, while I was playing Wilds with the base armor set to see how high I could go before I needed to change my armor, I got to Uthduna, and Uthduna is not the equivalent of a Tobikadachi. It's the apex of the region, and is more the equivalent of something like Rathalos or Diablos. And those monsters definitely would be killing me instantly. Uthduna doesn't, because of the health thing that I described already. But still, without armor upgrades, yeah, Uthduna was doing a lot of damage. What I found interesting, though, was that he couldn't really finish me off. I was taking damage and many of the attacks left me close to dying, but they never really killed me. It's much harder in Wilds to put me in an uncomfortable situation when I can just press the secret button and the secret will come get me. It isn't even just that the Seikret can get you when you're knocked on the ground. You don't have to be on the ground. If you want to heal, you just run away from the monster, call the Seikret, and heal while you're going around in the circle. It's very hard for the monster to put you in an uncomfortable situation where you feel at risk of dying. And I didn't really appreciate how stark the difference was until I went back to World to get this footage. So just to conclude, in Monster Hunter Wilds, the hunter has more health, the monsters do less damage, you have easier access to stronger healing, and it's much easier to make use of that healing since you can use the secret to pick you up and carry you around while you heal or sharpen or whatever. So, the point being, Monster Hunter Wilds really is just unusually easy. Now that we've established that, let's talk about why that's a problem. When I first played World, what I noticed was that this game had a focus on several elements that made it stand out from other action games. First of all was commitment. One of the reasons I fell in love with Monster Hunter's combat when I played it in Monster Hunter World is that the gameplay is slower and more commitment heavy than even other action games that are famous for it. Things like Dark Souls and Elden Ring are often praised for their slow, deliberate combat. They're praised for their heavy commitment to weapon attacks and the risk of getting hit that they entail. Well, Monster Hunter has that, but to a much greater degree. There is more commitment, a greater emphasis on positioning and attack angles. Each weapon is also complex and has many more moves available to it, and with those additional moves comes more choices for you as the player to make. In my opinion, that's where Monster Hunter shines. It's what sets it apart and above other games in its genre. And it is specifically commitment to attacks, and the focus on positioning that Capcom decided to take behind the shed and shoot. Focus mode lets all weapons attack in any direction whenever they want. It's no longer important to plan out and line up your attacks, and this is very related to the commitment I was talking about because you no longer have to commit to a direction. Greatsword got the worst of it. It can aim in focus mode while charging up its attacks, and it can do that for every level of its charge. The Greatsword was the poster boy for commitment. Its attacks were slow, it did big damage, but the angles in which it could attack were narrow. And now, not only can it attack in any direction, it can change the direction of its attack 180 degrees as it's attacking. You know, the fantasy of the biggest final hit that the Greatsword does is that the momentum is so strong that after the first hit, it carries you forward to the second. But that's no longer the case, because after the first hit, you can continue to angle the attack, and even force yourself to go in the opposite direction. And it's not just about positioning, commitment of all kinds has been reduced. Dual blades don't have to commit to Demon Dance, they can dodge out of it. Longsword doesn't have to commit to Helmbreaker, it can stop in the middle of the air. And if it does choose to do the Helmbreaker, its follow-up Spirit Release Slash gives you hyper armor and added defense for its duration. We wouldn't want you facing consequences for your big attacks, now would we? All of the shield weapons have access to a perfect guard that is very strong and has very generous timing. It's very easy to perform. And it seems like every weapon has like a dozen of these little changes that remove their disadvantages. I'm not going to keep talking about this because I could make a 20-minute long video on just the longsword. In fact, I did do that. The point I'm making is that it's very disappointing whenever I see this element that I value so highly, this element of commitment and limitation, being de-emphasized or removed. It's sad to come to the realization that Capcom doesn't see this as an integral part of the Monster Hunter series, and it's something that I thought was. In a similar vein are things like sharpening. In World, because you had no access to the Seikret, you would have to find a time to sharpen. So you would either sharpen when the monster runs from you, or you would sharpen in the middle of combat when you find an opening. It's one of those preparation aspects that sells you on the fantasy that you're hunting a monster. With the Seikret, you don't have to really do anything to sharpen. You just get on the Seikret and you sharpen. In Wilds, it feels more like a vestigial organ, like something that's left behind. It doesn't serve a purpose anymore. To me, it feels like Capcom doesn't believe in sharpening. It doesn't feel like it's doing anything important, but it didn't have the balls to remove it in this game. If we keep heading in this direction, I suspect in the next game it just won't exist. Because in a way, it kind of doesn't exist already. One of the things that sharpness does is that if your weapon goes too low, it'll start bouncing off of certain hard parts of the monster. In Monster Hunter World, you could bounce off of a monster as early as the second monster. Kuluyaku could dig up a rock, and if you hit the rock, you'd bounce off of him. It's a great introduction into just bouncing in general. In Monster Hunter Wilds, though, I didn't even know that there was weapon bouncing until deep down the line. For the first 6 hours or so, I was convinced that the mechanic was more or less removed. And the problem I have with this minimization is the same problem I had with the minimization of commitment. World led me to believe that this was an integral part of the series, the preparation aspect. The elements in the game that's trying to sell you on the hunting fantasy. Things that were inconvenient but were necessary to optimally hunt the monster. This includes monster tracking, weapon sharpening, hot and cold drinks, different monsters doing different kinds of status effects that require different kinds of solutions such as poison, sleep, blights, and the like. In Wilds, though, they were minimized or removed, so tracking's gone completely. Sharpening is less important because you don't bounce off of monsters very often, and it's easier to do because you can just call your Seikret to do it safely. In its current implementation, I think it just might as well be removed. I'd rather have nothing than this. We do still have different status effects and different concoctions that will heal the different status effects, but now we just have a heal status effect menu option, so you can just bring all of the different status effect items, and you don't have to select them. Your hunter will automatically choose the best one for the situation. Any meal will give you your full health buff, and it will last anywhere from 30 to 50 minutes. You don't have to slowly build up the effectiveness of your canteen over the course of the game. The full health benefit is just given to you right away. When knocked down after taking a big hit of damage, you no longer have to carefully get up so as to not get hit again. You can just call the Seikret. He'll easily take you to safety, and you'll be mounted while you heal. In a way, it's even worse than the wirefall in Monster Hunter Rise, because it's an infinite wirefall that also puts you immediately on your mount, making it very difficult for monsters to put you in uncomfortable situations. And then there are things like stun. I also thought stun might have been removed from the game, since throughout my 65 or so hour playthrough, I may have gotten stunned less than, 10 times. I don't think I noticed anything like tremors either, or wind resistance. It's like all these things that people said were tedious and annoying have been removed, so that you can get back to fighting the monster as quickly as possible. Even getting knocked down is uncomfortable. It's tedious and annoying. The Seikret will get you up and get you back into the fight. Getting stunned and not being able to control your hunter is annoying. Let's minimize its effects. Bouncing off of monster parts is tedious. Let's reduce the frequency of that. Having to stop and sharpen in the middle of a fight is annoying. Let you do it on the Seikret, and then the next game will just take it out. You can't control your hunter for a little bit when you feel a tremor. Let's reduce it to the point that nobody notices it's there. The thing is, I liked the tedious and annoying elements of Monster Hunter. Was it not okay for there to be one game that had this focus on deliberateness, on preparation, on commitment? That made you be careful where on the monster you attack? That made you be careful how you attack and in what direction you attack? And that would penalize you if you didn't do it or did it poorly? There's a term coined by people that agree with me called, I want to play Monster Hunter, not Monster Fighter, or something to that effect. It's called Monster Hunter, not Monster Fighter, when you're arguing as to the direction the series is going. The phrase is expressing a desire to not move away from the hunting simulation aspects, the preparation aspects, the tedious and annoying aspects that the current games seem to eschew. Now, of course, I agree with the statement. I love the monster fighting. I like getting to the monster and fighting it. That's great. But the monster hunting parts, the parts that come before the fighting, the parts that make the fighting a little bit more deliberate, add spice to the fighting. In my opinion, it makes the fighting better. It makes you engage with the monster fighting in a deeper way, and it lets you appreciate it in a deeper way. Just as an example, I really like the monster designs on these monsters. Monster Hunter Wilds really did a phenomenal job with almost all of them. One of the things I appreciate the most about the monster designs is that they're not just fantasy monsters. They're animals that live in a fantasy environment. They live in a fictional environment. And their design and movements and attacks reflect that. But it's hard to appreciate both that aspect of the monster and even the fight itself during the low rank when you're breezing through everything and nothing provides any kind of challenge. These monsters are great and they deserve better than this. Lalabarina deserves a better first impression. So does Uthduna, so does New Udra. I think it's crazy that people think it's okay to be able to sleepwalk through low rank. It's not. People will use this argument that, oh, the low ranks have always been easy. But it's not true. It's never been this easy. You couldn't just be asleep in Monster Hunter World. A little Kuluyaku with a rock will do over 50% of your health in one hit, and he has a high propensity to stun with that attack, letting him follow up with another attack that will finish you off. There is no wall in Monster Hunter Wilds. There's nothing as difficult as an Anjanath that suddenly makes you cart and realize, okay, I need to upgrade my armor. And again, I have to re-emphasize that it's not just about damage when it comes to Monster Hunter Wilds' ease. It's the combination of a lot of little things. It's how strong your Palico is, how convenient it is to use your Seikret to get out of a sticky situation. It's about wounds often keeping a monster locked to a position and continuously taking damage over the course of a hunt. It's about how little monsters interfere with you. Be it bouncing off of monsters, wind resistance, tremors, or stuns, they're minimized to the point that you might suspect they're gone. So even if it was true that the monsters do comparable damage in low rank and high rank, Monster Hunter Wilds would still end up being much easier. One argument that I've heard is that the difficulty is at the very top. At the end game, Tempered Gormagala 5-star actually is difficult. And I'll concede that. At the end game 5-strength, Tempered Gormagala actually is pretty tough. But I think it's insane that we are okay with any level of difficulty, any level of engagement or challenge, being restricted to the end of the endgame. I'm not asking for everything to be super hard, I'm asking for challenge to be distributed across the low and high ranks as well. Something along the lines of Monster Hunter World is close to ideal. At the point in which you fight that first Anjanath, with the tools you have available, I still find it more difficult to beat that Anjanath than almost anything in Monster Hunter Wilds. Alright. Before we move off of the difficulty argument, I can already sense several other platitudes making their way to the comment section, so I'll address a few more here. You may have noticed that I'm using the longsword in these clips. It is my favorite weapon. And so I expect the comment, imagine complaining about difficulty when you're using the easiest weapon in the game. So let's deal with this one now. First of all, I also use the longsword in Monster Hunter World, and my impression remains the same. In fact, I used the longsword in Monster Hunter World when I came back to it to test its difficulty against Monster Hunter Wilds. And despite the fact that I'm extremely experienced with the longsword in World, and that I'm very accustomed to the moveset of the monsters in Monster Hunter World, I still find them more challenging than the monsters in Monster Hunter Wilds, even though I just started playing Wilds and I have not yet become accustomed to their movesets. And the second point is a bit more controversial. People may not like this, but I think it's true. The longsword is not the easiest weapon to use in Monster Hunter Wilds. I think the dual blades are easier, I think the bowguns are easier, I think the gun lance is easier, and the sword and shield. And I think that had I used any of those weapons for my first playthrough, I would have had a much easier time and carded less. In fact, I think the only reason that I carded was because I was using the longsword, and let me explain why. You see, to get really good at the longsword, you have to be able to EI Spirit / monsters attacks. And the timing of certain attacks can be weird, and which ones are weird, it differs from monster to monster. So even if you understand the longsword very well, you still need to also understand the monster to look good fighting it. And the process of getting good at that means basically putting yourself in front of the monster in Special Sheath and getting hit over and over until you master the timing. And since I was doing that even the first time I was going through the game, I was much more likely to cart than I would have been had I been using a different weapon. It's easier to just get out of the way, or if you're using the sword and shield or gun lance, it's easier to just get a perfect block. I feel that the perfect guard is much easier to do than the EI Spirit Slash. The timing is much more generous, and even if you fail it, you still happen to be blocking, meaning it's much less dangerous overall. So I don't believe that using the longsword made my experience through the low rank and the high rank easier, I think it made it harder. Finally, the next thing people will say when talking about difficulty is some version of don't use the palico, don't make armor, don't upgrade the armor, don't use weapons, or something to that effect. And it's true that you can have a harder experience by foregoing certain mechanics, but what I'm criticizing is the game's balance. I'm not a challenge runner. I have no problem with challenge runners, but it's not the experience I'm looking for. A big part of the appeal of Monster Hunter is crafting equipment and making interesting builds with that equipment. Build making is half the game. Tinkering with your sets and optimizing is fun. To stop doing that for the sake of having a more difficult experience would mean foregoing one of the most interesting parts of the game, which would still be bad. What I want is to use everything I have available to me, and then, having done that, still have the monsters be engaging in the low and high rank, and challenging at the endgame. I like the palico. I don't want to get rid of the palico. I like seeing him around, I like what he does. I just am objecting to how well he does it. Yes, I can have a more challenging experience by foregoing the palico, and I did. I put him away many times throughout my playthrough. But again, I would be foregoing the enjoyment of using my palico in exchange for an increased difficulty. What I'm asking for is to have both at once, and I don't think that's unreasonable. Now the next comment I'd like to deal with is the gatekeeping comment. You're gatekeeping by calling for the game to be more difficult. My response to this one is simply no, I'm not. And I think it's just that simple. No, I'm not. What I'm doing is simply criticizing the things I don't like and calling for the things I do like. The fact that I want more challenge has nothing to do with anybody else. I am not thinking about other people. I am simply telling you what I want. And it just so happens that some number of people are going to agree with me and want the same thing. It is Capcom that is in the privileged position to see me express my grievances and my wants, and see everybody else in the community do the same, and decide the direction of the series. Let's talk about the story in Monster Hunter Wilds, and the story in Monster Hunter in general. Monster Hunter Wilds has a really bad story. But in its defense, so does Monster Hunter World and Monster Hunter Rise. And in this case, I'm not going to quibble about degree, because I think the degree is more or less the same. They're all kind of bad. Many people in the community think Monster Hunter 4 Ultimate has the best story, and I agree, but it is the best out of a pretty poor pile. But even so, there's a lot that I like about the Monster Hunter story. It's just that it has very little to do with the game's plot. The following is a staff comment for the Monster Hunter Illustration 1. Even those who do not draw have a set of preconceived notions regarding how a given creature moves. That's why we can't really fudge any major point with regards to a monster's physical structure and movements. If we do, the players are more likely to reject the reality of the monster in question. That's why we spend a lot of time not only on the skeletal structure, but also the meat and the skin that we put on any given monster. It can be pretty difficult to try and imagine how the skin should hang off of a certain fictional creature, but as I look back through the illustrations for the game, I can see how we improved as we went along, and that makes me happy. In the Monster Hunter Illustrations 2, Hirochika Nagaki said the following: "For the Monster Hunter titles, I try to capture a sense of living creatures in the design. That's the theme I follow. I take into consideration not just the thought of making them look cool, but also their dignity as wild creatures, and elements that would facilitate play as a game." When asked about the inclusion of the blatantly fantastical monsters next to the grounded ones, Kaname says the following: "When you create a world full of mythical creatures like the Kirin, the entire world starts to feel like a very fantastical place with no basis in reality. Our focus for the world of Monster Hunter was to create a place that would feel like it could be real. By tossing in a decidedly fantasy-themed creature into this realistic world, it really makes the Kirin stand out in the player's eyes. And we hope that such unexpected surprises will make the world a more exciting place for them to explore. That's why we made the decision to include creatures like the Kirin." In a different staff comment, he says, "With Monster Hunter 2, we intentionally tried going with a more fantastical feel to our designs and added new ancient dragon types. We also hoped that this new infusion of ancient dragon monsters would help make existing monsters like the Rathian and Rathalos seem more realistic as far as this world was concerned." So, the thing with Monster Hunter, especially the mainline titles, is that the monster designs and the environment they're found in are attempting to be realistic. They're trying to depict fictional creatures that evolved in a fantasy environment. In the portable games, that's less of a focus, but in Monster Hunter World and Monster Hunter Wilds, they really leaned all into it. The monsters are not magic, there is a naturalistic reason why they're able to do the things they do. For example, the Quematries. Its tail emits a flammable oil. He creates fire by igniting that oil by dragging his tail across the ground. Xiwu's blades are made from its secreted mucus. Tobikadachi builds up static electricity in its fur, and Ajarikans coat their back with metal which they then heat through friction. Now we can argue about how successful any one of these attempts are at being realistic, but the point is that there is an attempt being made. In any other game, the dragon can breathe fire just because it's magic, it can just breathe fire. The Rathalos, though, has a flame sac. There's a non-magic reason why they can do the things they do. The Elder Dragons, though, are more fantastical. You don't know what they are. And by you, I mean the people in the game world don't know how they're doing the things they're doing. The researchers in the world see Elder Dragons as so powerful and so unusual that they don't want to classify them as normal animals. They don't know what they are. And I think the reason for that is because Monster Hunter is depicting man's ancient relationship with nature. Regular monsters are how we viewed animals. Dangerous animals. They're monsters. We don't know what's in the forest. We don't know the nature of all the monsters in the forest. We just know that sometimes people go into the forest and they don't come back out. It's easy to see how ancient man might have seen a tiger or a bear as a monster, when the only thing you have to defend yourself against it is a stick or a stone spear. Elder Dragons, though, I think are metaphors, they're representatives of natural phenomena, like firestorms, hurricanes, tornadoes, diseases even. And together they represent the friction mankind used to have with nature, and in some ways still has with nature. In the world of Monster Hunter, humanity wants to be prosperous, and to do that they need to find their place in an ecosystem that is very hostile. They need to assert themselves, they need to assert their right to survive and thrive, while also seeing themselves as stewards of nature. And this is the part of Monster Hunter's story that I like. I'm invested in the monsters, I'm invested in the environment, I'm invested in the romance of being a hunter that helps your community by practicing your trade. Another way to say it is that I like Monster Hunter stories in spite of their stories. In fact, their stories interfere with my ability to enjoy the game. The more they railroad me, the more they force me to look at their stupid story, the less I'm able to enjoy it. And for this reason, I think Monster Hunter Wilds is the worst offender. I hated this story.
Tashin, out there, I saw many things. Many people, creatures, all living life to the fullest. Life. Is that what you call this? Constructed husks they can't even eat? Locked away when they're no longer needed? Arkfeld. All it wanted was to be free! And I don't know which of us is worse.
I'm not going to waste time harping on about the story. I haven't seen anyone make the attempt to defend it. It seems that it's pretty universally disliked. So trying to analyze the story is really more than it deserves, and it would just be beating a dead Arkveld. And I feel like I do enough of that in the endgame. A more relevant topic that I will talk about is what bothers me about the structure. Because I expect the Monster Hunter story to be bad, the structure, though, is worse than normal. So let me explain how I like playing my Monster Hunter games. After it makes me do the initial assigned quests that I have to do, I look around for people to talk to. I like doing all of the optional content at the time in which it's delivered to me. I'm not a fan of just speeding through the story. I am not an advocate of this idea that the real game starts at the end game, 20 hours in. No, I like to take my time, I like to meander. I like getting a sense for the world. Like I was saying before, my appreciation of the story comes from my personal appreciation of the world, of the monsters, the environments, and the fantasy of doing quests, doing things to help out people within your community. So I'll talk to the people available in the hub and see what quests they give me. Then I do all the optional quests available to me before moving forward with the story. In World, there was a lot of stuff like this, a lot of optional side stuff that you can do while you go through the story. Quests that give you canteen ingredients, quests that increase your farm's efficacy, quests that give you mantles, quests that unlock new camp locations in the map. Among my favorite are the Palico activities, where you go to a new region, meet the local Palicos, and your Palico learns from them, acquiring a new tool that he can use and level up. And you can choose which one of the tools he brings with him to battle. And even just the normal optional quests that were there, that didn't seem to give you any special reward, things like kill a certain amount of small monsters or collect minerals or mushrooms or whatever, even those I enjoyed, because it gave me an excuse to go out into the world and really just explore it. I can immerse myself in the atmosphere between story sections. In Monster Hunter Wilds, though, there really aren't that many optional quests. At least not the kind I'm describing. It's very rare that you'll be able to engage in an optional quest on behalf of somebody that you talk to for a reward. And the few that exist don't really give you good rewards like the ones I described. I think one of the quests to find an endemic life gave me 10 mega potions, which is not exactly what I was talking about. In high rank, there are a few more than there were in low rank. There are a couple of quests that you do for your Palico to upgrade his tools. And there are a few that you do on behalf of NPCs that will allow those NPCs to spawn out in the world and give you a hand, kind of like the Lineans did in World. But what I'm describing is very sparse. There's probably less than 10 of these kind of quests. And I'm being generous with that 10, I don't think it's close to that. Now, technically speaking, optional quests still exist. There is a tab for optional quests, and when you go there, there's a lot of monsters to hunt. The problem is, I noticed very quickly that there are no optional quests until you hunt that monster for the first time, and then the only optional quest that spawns is hunt this monster that you just hunted. And at this point you might say, well, why didn't you just go out of the camp and hunt the monsters that were outside, and in this way you could have gotten immersed in the world like you said that you wanted? There's a couple of reasons. Number one, those quests aren't exactly like the optional quests that I enjoy because it's not coming from a person. So I don't get to live out the fantasy that I'm helping my community through my job as a hunter. And second, in the low rank especially, there's not really a reward that I want out of just hunting the monster for no reason. There's no canteen ingredient to expand, there's no mantle to earn. Sure, I'll go out of my way to hunt a monster for some armor pieces or upgrading my weapon, but the optional quests gave me the excuse to engage with the world for something other than that. And third, there are lots of points throughout the low rank where the game simply will not let you leave the camp. Straight up denies you the ability. You have to proceed down the main story, and it's not going to let you do anything else until you do. Wilds railroads you at a breakneck pace, pushing you constantly to do the main story. It doesn't feel like it wants you to do anything else. In a way, it actually shoves your face into the main narrative more than even Monster Hunter World did. Because World may have had unskippable cutscenes and Wilds doesn't. But Wilds also introduces a bunch of stilted in-game dialogue interactions with NPCs. So it'll have its cutscenes, it'll have the dialogue, and then once you get past all that and you get to the quest proper, it has what is basically an extended, unskippable cutscene as you slowly walk to the location of the monster. Before release, Capcom talked about how tracking was still in the game, but you would only track the monster once, the first time that you hunted. And this, it turns out, is what they were talking about. This on-the-rails nature walk through the environments as you slowly walk up to the monsters and the NPCs yap away at you. It's really the opposite of what I like about Monster Hunter. Instead of leaving me alone and letting me enjoy the atmosphere, you're trying to artificially insert it into my brain. And it just doesn't work. You're not going to get me to like your environment more by forcing me to go through it slower. And actually, now we need to talk about the tracking. In Monster Hunter World, monsters would leave behind tracks. You can pick up the tracks, and as you picked more and more of them up, it would reveal the location of the monster. In Wilds, that's no longer the case. The monster is visible on the map at any point in time, and the Seikret can automatically take you to it. And I find that I just really dislike the Seikret. Not just because of how strong it is, not just because of the effect he has on combat. I dislike how he just takes you wherever you need to go. Because the Seikret kind of makes the maps not exist for me. What's the point of having these large open world-ish maps? What's the point of all of this so-called seamlessness? I have 65 hours on the game and I don't know the layout of any of the locales, just because the Seikret will take me straight to the monster. Not that gathering is a big focus in this game, but if I wanted to gather, the Seikret would take me straight to that too. Now maybe you didn't like the tracking in Monster Hunter World. And that's fair, I think it could have been improved. But that's what should have happened. It should have been improved and not taken out. It's just another case of Capcom minimizing or removing something that doesn't immediately lead you to get to the monster faster. As if that was the one and only priority. But it's not the one and only priority for me. I have explained how I like to enjoy the atmosphere, and looking for monster tracks is kind of part of that for me. I think the tracking worked well in Worlds, because it really had the biggest effect only at the beginning. So when you don't know where the monsters are anyway, you have to wander around the map and find them. It has its biggest effect on your mind in the low rank, when you're still inexperienced. And I've heard people say, well, I don't want to do that over and over. At the end game, when I'm just farming a monster, I just want to know where the monster is. And I have good news for those people because that's exactly what happens. Tracking is an immersive element that lets you get acclimated to the environment, figure out the map layout, but it doesn't persist forever. After you've tracked monsters enough time, you'll level them up, and they will simply appear on your map to begin with. It doesn't intrude on your endgame grind. And I think it has the bones of a good system. I would get rid of the scout flies being so abrasive and ugly, but other than that, it just needs some minor changes. But instead, Wilds gets rid of tracking and replaces it with the on-the-rails section at the start of every new mission. And this happens not just one time or two times, it's like every quest. It's like every new quest, they do this again and again. And it's made worse because once you're free, and you get to actually fight the monster dies immediately. It feels like I spend 75% of this game listening to the dialogue, the cutscenes, and then the on-the-rails section to get to the monster, and then the monster itself feels like an afterthought. Oh, great, you killed the monster in 5 minutes. Let's go move on to the next on-the-rail dialogue section. And then I'm like, please, Wilds, please, can I do an optional quest for a canteen ingredient? Can I talk to the NPCs and have them send me somewhere? And then Wilds is like, no, get back on the train, you're not leaving until high rank. So my opinion is that even among Monster Hunter stories, Wilds is particularly bad because a greater focus and emphasis is placed on it. It won't get out of my way so that I can enjoy it on my own terms. I don't really know what to say to conclude this video other than I don't like it. I think it's a big step down from World going in the wrong direction, and I don't think I'm alone. I think there's a lot of people that agree with me. Even if they like the game overall, they will still agree with some of the points I've made here. And I hope that's enough to get Capcom to course correct in the next game. But I guess we'll see. That's the end of this video. If I haven't alienated you, then I am sure I'll get you in a future one. Please feel free to argue in the comments with each other to drive up my engagement. If you prefer Monster Hunter World, please help me put these Monster Hunter Wilds fans in their place. And by their place, I mean in front of a shiny pair of dangling keys. I get the feeling they'd like that. If you like Monster Hunter Wilds, you can counter the Monster Hunter World people by saying that they're resistant to change and set in their ways or whatnot. And if you're a fan of the old gen Monster Hunters, go away.